It's great to have you all here. So welcome to Blurred Lines 3.0. So we're excited to be back on Zoom once again. It's fun, but someday we'll be back and doing some things in person, but it's so cool to have so many people from all over the place. Tonight we're going to talk more about the frequent situation we find ourselves in as industrial designers, working in roles that blur the line between traditional industrial design and other fields. So I'm Aaron Cochran. I'm currently doing my master's in cognitive systems engineering at Ohio State, and I'm the events coordinator for the Columbus IDSA chapter. Currently on a break from industrial design. So in this year's event, like the past two Blurred Lines, that is a collaboration between the Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus chapters of IDSA, and they'll introduce themselves later. A little bit of history of our event. The first Blurred Lines was in September of 2020. It was a large collaboration event between the Ohio chapters during COVID. We talked about the intersection of industrial design and user interface design. And last year was our second Blurred Lines 2.0, and that was last May, and we talked about the intersection of design and business. And this year, we're talking about the intersection of our workflows and products with emerging technologies. So we've got some great people here tonight from with expertise in VR and AI and a few other technologies that we'll talk about. I'm sorry, I lost my thing, but our big questions tonight is, what is it like to design in the world of tomorrow and for the world of tomorrow, and what will the designer's toolbox look like in the future as new technologies continue to enter? So the designers on our panel tonight are taking advantage of these new tools and software to augment their workflows and skill sets, and they're integrating these new technologies into their everyday practice to have some valuable insights into what it will mean to design with and for these technologies in the future. So Maria is going to tell us about what we're going to do tonight. Take it away, Maria.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Maria Basili. I am the current chair of IDSA Columbus. I'm currently working as an industrial designer at Design Central, so shout out to my coworkers who showed up tonight. Thank you. So for tonight, after some brief introductions, we'll give the stage to our wonderful speakers to share their experiences and knowledge. And then we know that this topic is one that sparks a lot of really cool conversation. That's part of the reason we chose it. So we purposely left like a decent chunk of time at the end for the audience to come in and kind of share their questions and comments with the speakers and just have a really good discussion. So feel free to share like any comments and questions in the chat throughout the event, and we'll come back to those at the end.
Great, thanks, Maria. Now I'd like to introduce tonight's presenters. So first we have William Nickley. He's an assistant professor in industrial design at the Ohio State University, and he'll be sharing about his explorations integrating artificial intelligence into the industrial design process. And some wisdom and guidance for those who might want to pick up these technologies after this event, because he's got some exciting stuff that I think will all inspire us to play around with new stuff a little bit. Then Kedar Benjamin is a freelance designer merging geometry processing and artificial intelligence to explore ways to automate parts of the design process. He's working on what it looks like to move AI towards production-ready products. Nicole is not here tonight, but is one of the founders of Footwearology and Footwearology Lab. And she helped put together that presentation, and she's working also on how AI can improve the design and manufacturing process. So we want to give her a little shout out. And then finally, Nico Van Stolk is a lead industrial designer at Kaleidoscope Innovation, an InfoSize company. He works there creating a collaborative spaces for robots and humans to thrive together, and he'll be sharing how user-centered design intersects with these areas. And then finally, young Chen is the lead user researcher on Axon's XR team out in Seattle, Washington. He might not be on yet, but he might be. He's popping out of work a few time zones behind, and I see he's here. So I'm so happy to have him back. One of my good friends back from Ohio State, and his research centers around the user experience of VR environments and he'll be talking about that today. So great. Maria, I think you're kicking off introducing our teams.
Yep. So as we mentioned before, this is a collaboration between the Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Columbus chapters. And this event could not have happened without any of the people from any of these teams. So we want to take a second to recognize them. So starting with Columbus, like I said earlier, I'm the chair of the Columbus chapter. Also in our chapter is Carly Giles, who is in here kind of behind the scenes. She's also an industrial designer at Design Central. And Aaron Cochran, our other MC, like you said, he's currently in grad school for cognitive systems engineering, but also industrial design background.
And I'm Scott Urban, chair of the IDSA Cleveland chapter, and I'm a senior product designer at the Metcalf Group. And our other chapter officers are Kristen Brinza, an industrial designer at Neon Carrot, who is the vice chair, and our media communications coordinator is Alexa Valore, who is a designer at Energizer Holdings. And we also get a lot of help from Joanna Celestina, also an industrial designer at Energizer Holdings.
And I'm Kat Rossoni. I'm part of the leadership team from the IDSA Cincinnati chapter. And I work with Alex Majo, who's the exposition designer at Shepherd Expositions, and Josh Haldeman, who's a design manager and industrial designer at Kinetic Vision. And together we lead the Cincinnati chapter. So super excited to be part of this event. This is my third Blurred Lines, and I couldn't be happier to be talking about this stuff with you guys today. So super excited to have you.
So before we get started, just a few last minute housekeeping items. Make sure you keep your speakers muted while the speakers are speaking. And like I said earlier, use the chat for any questions or comments so we can bring them back up at the end. And please let us know if you need any accommodations, and we'll do our best to make that happen. And finally, this session is recorded, as you probably saw when you entered the meeting. And so we'll post it later for your later viewing. So time to get started. Oops, let me stop sharing my screen. So our first speaker is Will Nickley. Will is an assistant professor in the Department of Design at The Ohio State University. He holds an MFA in design and a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Design. He brings over a decade of professional experience to the classroom, and he researches social design practice as a member of the Ohio State Thesis Lab and teaches courses in the industrial design major. His research lies at the intersection of social design, design methods, and community engaged design. Will, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Maria. That's some introducing I don't have to take any time doing myself. Let me get this into full screen mode and maybe give me a nod that you can see and hear me.
Looks good.
Great. Thank you. And I'm going to minimize this thing. Okay, hello everybody. Thanks for being with us for Blurred Lines 3.0. As you just heard, my name is Will Nickley. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm at Ohio State these days, doing a whole bunch of stuff. I want to shout out one of my colleagues, Matt Lewis, who's also a professor at Ohio State, for some of the great references I'll share with you today. I'd also like to start by mentioning or acknowledging the native land that I'm joining you from in Columbus, Ohio. These are the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Shawnee, Potawatomi, Delaware, Miami, Peoria, Seneca, Wyandot, Ojibwe, and Cherokee peoples. If you want to learn more about where you are and who the land is, who the land belongs to, check out this website as a starting point. As Maria mentioned, I look at design a number of ways. One thing that I do is look at systems that emerge when people design from one another. I'm also often working with youth. One of the big projects I'm working on outside of teaching these days has to do with providing affirmative healthcare to youth, particularly queer and trans youth in Ohio. I'd love to talk about that more, and this will circle back to. Today, my presentation centers AI, thanks Wikipedia for this gem of an icon, identity, and Pokemon, believe it or not. And AI for the purposes of this presentation are going to focus mostly, I'll talk about a prompt-based generative AI. So these are artificial intelligence systems that take some sort of prompt and spit out something. You may have heard a few of these like Midjourney, DALL-E, Wombo, etc. If not, don't worry, I'll introduce a few of these. Here's an example of one that's become popular recently because of its access. You can join a Discord server and mess around with this for free. Midjourney takes prompts, text style prompts, and a few parameters, and it will allow you to spit things out. For example, I asked Midjourney to imagine something cool to show during a design presentation, and this is what it came up with. Check it out. Ooh, it's architecture, it's concept art. I also asked Midjourney to imagine a logo for a talk about design and artificial intelligence, and here's what it found. Funny enough, a few months back, I busted my kneecap. They wouldn't show me the x-rays, so I asked Midjourney to tell me what my proximal pole closed fracture of my patella looked like. It was good enough to fool a few friends on Instagram. So there's some fun to be had. I would encourage you to check out some of these text to image AI systems. There are also systems that will take images as inputs. Midjourney just released version 4, and never mind all the chaos on this slide, it will allow you to take some image like this cool logo that I just showed you and add text to refine the image. So this is a bright, shiny, fun, playful, peaceful future version of the logo for a talk about AI and design. Which one do you like? Who can say? There are a number of artists and designers who take to the Twitter sphere, despite Elon Musk, I suppose, these days, to showcase their work. One of the features of Midjourney 4.0 is the ability to combine two images to make a series of possible combinations, like this fuzzy cat and that robot thing making a bunch of robot cats. Or this one that I shared with students in my visualization class this morning. I've been asking them to translate visual brand language elements from brands like Radio Flyer into objects that they don't already design, like this toaster. And believe it or not, Midjourney can output a variety of somewhat comical variations here. We can upscale them, we can refine them, we can make different styles. There's the rabbit hole is deep here. Here are a couple other combinations, like let's say you wanted to take that latest Lemonouche inspiration image and apply it to a drill. Hey, there's some interesting input for your next ID project. What about that cool shoe you just saw? Here's a bunch of DeWalt drill shoes, or are they shoe DeWalt drills? I don't know. You can tell me. I told you Pokemon was going to be a part of this, and believe it or not, there are answers to this question as well. But it will get more interesting than this, I promise. So we've covered a few of the types of AI inputs and outputs here. And there are lots of other systems, including some that will take text prompts and output text prompts. For example, there's one system, GPT-3, that actually took inputs from a user, wrote an entire academic paper, and that paper, as far as I know, is still under review in an academic journal. Pretty crazy stuff. For those of you who have seen this stuff and you're interested about where else it might go, designers and creatives haven't stopped at what they can put into the system and what comes out of it. They've started integrating AI into other systems, other pieces of software. For example, Blender. In Blender, you can actually, you know what? This one I don't think is Blender. I'm going to skip it. In Blender, there is a plugin that will allow you to import or essentially take Stable Diffusion, which is another one of these image-based AI generation tools, and apply different aesthetics to 3D scenes that you create in Blender. For example, you can take a 3D model and crop it a certain way and ask Stable Diffusion to turn it into a certain style concept art painting. This is one that I just noticed. This was from last week. I'd imagine there might be a few VR Sketch fans in the room. Gravity Sketch might ring a bell here. Scotty Fox, which is a Twitter user, was demoing a custom system for being able to overlay in real time Stable Diffusion aesthetic on top of a 3D sketched model to give you a very painterly and kind of creepy output from a 3D input. Pretty cool stuff. So, and there are more examples of these. These slides are available afterwards. I have a link I could share with folks, and I would encourage you to just check out some of these examples. People have extended aesthetic to panoramic views. They've extended the capability of this type of system to overlay AR, so a live video feed with imagery. And this is really interesting. For example, in this video, you can see someone kind of highlighting in real time a surface of a wall they're looking at, and then asking Stable Diffusion to overlay the results of a prompt. This prompt being a cute cat. So anyway, some inspirational examples. I'm going to keep going for time's sake here. Now, we're kind of through part one of this presentation, being cool stuff that people are doing with AI, specifically prompt-based generative stuff. I saw this post a little while ago. This is another Twitter user who discovered a woman that they called Loeb, that appeared in lots and lots of different prompt, or I guess generated images. And it's a really kind of creepy read about identity and sort of like the embedded stuff in the systems such as Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. And this really started to get me thinking about some of the stuff that I've been working on. I mentioned that one of the things I work on these days has to do with affirmative care practice, providing healthcare to queer and trans youth. And in this work, which is co-design work, identity is a really important thing. In fact, identity is something that we look at as very nuanced. It's not just age or gender or race, but a whole host of things that tend to intersect to privilege or oppress people. And it began to make me wonder how AI systems such as Midjourney deal with identity. Right? So how is identity represented as outputs from AI systems? An initial exploration here, I asked Midjourney to imagine a, quote, non-binary Pokemon in a happy future fantasy. Non-binary here being the key word, meaning someone who doesn't identify as a woman or a man. And as you can see here, it's a range of like cute Pokemon-like outputs. Even if you're not familiar with Pokemon, you can see that these look like creatures of some kind. There's some sort of human features in that they look like portraits. There seem to be some semblance of clothing. People might start to pick up things like rainbows, which might remind you of colors associated with flags related to like non-binary folks, but it was the start of an exploration that I'm about to share with you. So this is where I come back to Pikachu. Pikachu, for those of you who have not heard of Pokemon, I'm sorry that this is the first time you're hearing about Pikachu, but for most people, this is probably the Pokemon, if you've heard of one, that you would recognize. It's this little anime creature. It's been around for a long time. It exists in many different forms, and there are lots and lots and lots of images that have been tagged and indexed by systems like Midjourney. Enough so, and with enough variation, that when you ask Midjourney to imagine a Pikachu, you get something like this. And it makes me wonder, like, what am I seeing? Well, I'm seeing a yellow critter. It seems to have eyes. It seems to have a yellow color. For anyone familiar with Pikachu, or if you're just seeing this for the first time, arguably, there's some semblance here. Okay. Now, how is this going to allow us to look into identity, specifically human qualities of identity? Well, I'll see. I guess come along with me for this little journey. Okay, so Pikachu, for those who don't know, does have both a male and a female form, and it's differentiated by this little shape of the tail. And when you ask Midjourney to imagine a female Pikachu, this is what you get. If you ask Midjourney to imagine a male Pikachu, this is what you get. And if we look at them side by side, you might just start to notice some things. And some questions that I started to ask myself when these outputs were shown to me was, does this look right? Does it feel right? Like, is that a female Pikachu? Is that a male Pikachu? Well, it's certainly different than how Pikachu appears in the world of Pokemon, but there are certainly qualities that maybe I associate with female or male in these two sets of generated outputs. Okay. What does right even mean, though, in this context? Right? I suppose for me, it means something that I'm seeing, let's say, with like hair-like features in the female Pikachu remind me of things that I tend to associate with women, but that's kind of problematic. It's kind of tied up in my conception of what it means to be female. So I started asking it some other things, like, what does a non-binary Pikachu look like? And you can see sort of a stark difference here. What if we throw some other terms from the LGBTQIA communities into Midjourney? What does it give us? Like, this is the LGBTQIA Pikachu. I'm seeing some colors. What do I see? Some colors associated with the queer pride flag. If we ask Midjourney to imagine a lesbian Pikachu, this is what it gives us: gay Pikachu, bisexual Pikachu, and it raises more questions, right? What does this tell us about the Midjourney algorithms, the design of the system? What does it tell us about Midjourney's training data, the things that were used to make its algorithms work and translate texts and images into image outputs? What does it tell us about its creators? Here are a couple more. Trans Pikachu, transsexual Pikachu, transgender Pikachu, queer Pikachu. Right, we're seeing some recurring themes again with colors. Like some of the colors here are related to the transgender pride flag. Once again, we have the queer pride flag. I'm seeing a few things related to like proportion and color. Genderqueer Pikachu, a different set of proportions and colors, some more like formal looking clothing. And again, like what might this tell us about queer representation in art and media? So I know these are some open-ended questions, and they're not things that I necessarily have answers for. Surprisingly, some words that are important in identity, things like intersex, were banned in this system. I couldn't even query the system for fear of having my account eliminated. So I'll thumb through a few of the rest of these here. And I guess I'll leave with a couple questions here. Like, can we, this exploration has made me question whether we can boil identity down to something that is visual. Because Midjourney does that. And should we boil identity, something as complex and nuanced as identity and human as identity, down to visual? Should we do that? Because Midjourney lets us do that. In fact, it even encourages us to do that by being a text-based, prompt-based AI tool. So I have a couple thoughts, and I have a feeling I'm close on time here. Midjourney, as one of these AI systems, takes some sort of input, some sort of seed, be it terms or images. And this is something that we as humans in a human AI hybrid system have control over. We should think about what we're asking these systems to do. And Midjourney, like some of these systems, generates some sort of output, right? Also, this system has a design, right? Someone created this system. Actually, many people created this system, created the algorithms, the interface, and those afford us, the users, a certain set of things that we can or can't do. And there are also huge sets of data used to train these systems. And every single one of these components is worth taking another look at. In fact, I'm certainly not the person to say this. There's a lot. If you look up like algorithmic bias, or even just search the terms problematic and AI, you'll find lots of reasons to question what happens in this system. But I would say, as designers, we naturally, like my students, like to play with this technology. We're in a creative mode. We see its potential, and we're concerned with the use of this system and the use of its output. So I would say it's very important in a system like this, where it's you and an AI, to stay a part of the system, use your own judgment, and allow yourself to question the output and how it might be used. One good example to leave you with of how this might look is, it comes from Scott Robertson. He's a well-known concept artist and designer who tends to draw things like mech vehicles. The one in the top left is a hand-drawn mech vehicle, and the one below it was something that Stable Diffusion spat out. He put in his mech drawing along with some prompts about sci-fi, or I guess actually it's Wombo, not Stable Diffusion, forgive me. And that's not where he stopped. He took it one step further and refined the image himself, brought himself back into the equation to continue to modify the output here. And I think that's probably a good way to move forward in these explorations between design, industrial design, and AI systems. So anyway, that's my talk. Thank you so much. There is a link down here in the bottom if you'd like to see this presentation further. It has lots of links for you to click if you want to play with any of these systems. I would encourage you to do so. Many of them are open. Well, I would say many of them are open enough so that you can play with them for free.
Thank you, Will, so much for your presentation. That was awesome. I've personally played with Wombo and some of those other things a lot, but this is definitely making me think a little bit deeper about, like, next time I use it, like what else is it telling me and what am I assuming from it? So that was really cool. If you could share your link to your presentation in the chat, that would be awesome. Thank you again. A round of applause for Will. And our next panelists are Kedar Benjamin and Nicoline Van Enter. Like we said earlier, Nicoline actually had a conflict tonight, but she was kind enough to send us a video of her portion of the presentation. But anyways, Nicoline is one of the founders of Footwearology and the Footwearology Lab. She is a world-renowned technology forecaster and visionary thinker with a background in engineering, journalism, marketing, and design. She has worked with a variety of big names in the footwear industry, and her main focus is how AI can improve the design and manufacturing process for all parties involved. And Kedar, our partner speaker of Nicoline, is an industrial designer whose obsession with AI and computational design has led him to merge geometry processing and AI to explore ways to automate parts of the design process. And one of his collaborations with AI is actually currently in the process of being ready for production. So that's super exciting. You guys are ready to go.
Okay, I'm gonna share the video which Nicoline recorded. I hope it works.
Hello, everybody.
Do you guys hear?
Sounds good.
Okay.
Very sorry that I cannot be there live this time. I am actually in Mallorca at this moment. And if you're thinking, oh, nice, Mallorca. Not the case this time because it's raining cats and dogs and there's a very loud thunder. So I actually hope that you're not hearing that. My name is Nicoline Van Enter. I am Dutch, but I live in Spain, in Barcelona, where I am one of the co-founders of Footwearology and Footwearology Lab. You see in this GIF my team and kind of an outlook on the types of things that we are doing and working towards, because we are a team of footwear visionaries on a mission to disrupt, or I'd rather say drastically improve, the footwear industry. And design automation is a very big part of what we do. And so is AI. And for us, the way we look at it is that since whatever we do within footwear is about creating meaningful innovation. So what does that mean? Concretely, it's to create a future where shoes have multiple life cycles, are manufactured and sold on demand through transparent, automated, local for local manufacturing and distribution systems. So when we're looking at AI, we're looking at it in this context of getting to a better industry than we have now. And that's also why it's a very interesting subject, because we see a lot of opportunities there, but also obviously a lot of threats. And before Kedar, who is one of our in-house computational designers, is going to show you an example, an early example of something that we have been doing inside AI and how to use AI to get to actual shoes, I would like to talk a little bit about what we do at Footwearology. So essentially our activities are threefold. We have courses, both online as well as on location in our own lab in Barcelona, but also in company, and that could be around the world. So we also teach a lot actually in the US. Then we do consulting for a lot of companies. We often function as an external R&D center. And what we especially do well is to connect parties inside the industry together to really create full workflows. And that means, for instance, that we are working with machine builders, polymer suppliers or other material suppliers, software suppliers, designers, social media platforms, and connect all of these together in actual full working concepts that bring that world that we envision of local manufacturing and transparent and on demand much closer. Our lab is in Barcelona. This is where we actively develop new circular footwear constructions. And that is not just from the physical side, but also from the digital side. And that's actually what I'm going to talk about a little bit today in my intro. So, like I mentioned, we give courses. Actually, we have a new course, which is called Design Automation from Ideation to Creation. And this is in Barcelona. It's from December 1 to 4. Unfortunately, at this point, we are full. In this course, this is a training where people are going to use AI to actually develop shoes, optimize their workflow, but also to learn how to handle AI. We will have more courses like this in the near future. So if you go to footwearology.com, you can follow what else it is that we do and if there's new courses coming up. This one is in person because we're actually 3D printing the shoes that are created in AI. But in the future might very well be that we have this fully online and only digital. What I wanted to show you quickly before I hand it over to Kedar is that what I think is really important as like a footwear veteran, when we look at AI, is not just so much how the AI works and the technicalities of it, because that is rapidly changing and will change, of course, as fast as we see it now in the coming years. It's much more about how it will change the role of the designer and how it will change the way we work. So here is an example that we did for a conference a few months ago, where we had an audience that didn't know anything about AI yet. And we tried two of the same prompts, footwear related, one in DALL-E and then the other one in Midjourney. So this is already a few months ago. So you will probably, if you try the same thing now, get much better results, but it's not so much about the actual technical level of the shoes. It's more to show you. So say I work for Timberland, a company that I've worked for quite a long time actually, and I want to develop a new shoe, and I have developed a prompt for that, and I use that in DALL-E. Now, maybe after the first excitement of people to see something like this being generated by AI, you get the issue of, well, okay, so what if you go a little bit further? Say basically within 15 minutes when we use this prompt, we had this level of result. And apart from each shoe as such and the quality of it, it's also the sheer volume. And this is actually not even much. You know, we are now working with different applications that do things right in 3D. And one of them gives you within 10 minutes, 1,500 renditions. So I think what is going to be super important for designers, and this is also where senior designers have a really good chance here, is you need to be able to curate. On the one hand, you need to be able to understand what to ask to an AI, but even more importantly, you need to be able to select from all of this, what then appears on your screen, what is the shoe that you actually want. And for me, that is not just about the aesthetic. Obviously, one of the things that we work very hard on is how to make shoes much more sustainable, circular, on-demand, local. So one of the things that we also do in-house, it's a very early stage, is to try and parameterize certain criteria or certain production principles, manufacturing principles, that will lead to a much more sustainable shoe. Because what I am afraid of, this is by the way the same prompt but then Midjourney, I think in V4 now you would probably have way better results, but that's not so much the point here. Again, look at all these shoes that you see in a line. Will you know which one to choose? Will you know which one would be the best one from a commercial perspective, a technical perspective, a sustainability perspective? Maybe not. So this is why it's important also in our view is that this more aesthetic focused part of AI is not used without also AI that could help optimize manufacturing and sustainability. Because one of the things that I'm afraid that will happen, and is actually already happening at this point, is that we have the same thing as with NFTs for the metaverse. People are starting to create the most outrageous designs and shoes and ideas and then want to produce those, basically having us end up with a huge wave of shoes that are super extreme, enormously unsustainable, will not be worn, are insanely expensive, and is essentially not what we want in this industry, nor as consumers, etc. So I think when Kedar is presenting the example that he has been making, I think it will also get a little bit more clear of how we link it to manufacturing, because that is a specific example also where it links to molding. But that is where our focus is. So if you are interested in that and want to do anything in this direction, both learning how AI works, but especially learning how to use it, not just in your advantage as a designer, but especially in the advantage of the entire industry, then yeah, come to us and experience what we do. So I wish you all a great conference, and I want to thank IDSA a lot for having us here in Blurred Lines. And yeah, I hope to see you all in Barcelona soon. And Kedar, take it away.
All right, I will. 1 second. I'm just going to switch presentations. Okay. Yeah, so I actually want to go a few slides back because, okay, never mind. So I'm going to talk about what we did for a conference a while back, which was using a software called Hyperganic. Now, Hyperganic is a voxel-based algorithmic engineering software that was used to design rockets and a bunch of other aerospace applications, but they did make a thing called design to mold. And design to mold was aimed at taking 2D, so Illustrator vectors, and then BMBs, bitmaps, pictures, and then using that to build a mold, which you can use to manufacture shoes. So we started out with a prompt in DALL-E, give us a kind of wavy midsole and a clear distinction between it and the upper. And then we extracted vector lines, and because you don't really get the other view, we had to kind of extrapolate what the other side of the shoe would look like. But we got the general shape of the midsole tooling. And then this is what Hyperganic does. It projects these onto a midsole and it subtracts the last, and it makes a, it projects it onto the last and it makes a midsole tooling shape out of it. So then, using Hyperganic's feature to export a silhouette, we were able to use DALL-E and in-paint various textures, depth maps, essentially, where it would eventually produce this on the shoe. And when you render it up with a nice upper, it ends up being something that looks interesting, is kind of trendy in today's market. And so what could be next would be textures which wrap the object, but are also able to understand what the object is. And voxel AI, and eventually AI will be able to understand constraints for manufacturability and constraints for comfort and that sort of thing. Probably something using voxels because that's how it would work, I imagine. So right now at the lab, we're working with this Google collab called Text to Mesh, which wraps a texture around objects, and it uses view angles. So it takes different pictures from each view, and it generates textures on the object based on those view angles. And it kind of merges all of these different views together and then bakes the texture into a displacement map. So you have to provide the 3D model, but you end up with a textured 3D model. So it's really useful because you can make one piece. What was that? Sorry. That's very strange. Anyway, you can make one piece constructions out of it, so it can be sustainable. This is another result from text to mesh. Sorry, someone called B.S. Nelson is drawing on my screen. Anyway, this was the prompt, and it came up with something quite interesting. And it seems to be that there's some sort of text, but it's not quite readable. So text to mesh is trained using the clip library, which is, I think it's a bunch of weights that has been trained on images on the internet, but it's not really available publicly to know what is there. So there's a lot of trial and error that we have to do. We actually did get in contact with the author of the paper and the author of the program, obviously, and he gave us some guidelines about size. So mesh size will affect this. You want more detail, you have to up the amplitude, which is a parameter in the Google Colab file. So I'm actually working with Zellerfeld on, and this actually started a while back, several months back, before we worked on text to mesh or anything. I'm working with Zellerfeld on a pair of AI generated or AI designed shoes, which I had put up on my Instagram a while back. And Zellerfeld, if you don't know, is a company that makes custom made 3D printed footwear made by FDM. And the reason why they're really innovative, I think, is because they're making one piece, one material shoes. You can send them back, they can get recycled, and you can get a new pair. Or it's the way that Zellerfeld sees it is that it would be the last pair of shoes that you would need. And it's also something that can be done locally. So they are selling their machines to manufacturers in the States right now. And I think soon, as they are able to scale, they will be able to sell them in more countries. So here was the image that I started off with. And Cornelius, who is the CEO, actually spotted this, and he was like, this one would be perfect because it's got that kind of lip, I would say, to it that seems to be something that is better for 3D printed footwear because you can slip your foot in easily. If you have something which is not, which doesn't have that, which doesn't have an opening which is large enough, it's much more difficult. So we eventually just modeled it in Blender and Maya and kept optimizing it. And eventually it's going to look something like this. And it'll be printed and fit to your foot shape, essentially. And yeah, here's a quick test print that we did. And it's still a work in progress. So I don't have any more updates, but this is how far we've gotten. But yeah.
Thanks, Kedar. That was really cool. Like a really, really interesting example of how like AI in the future can like become part of our like design, not only like early design and ideation, but also get into like the manufacturing process. which is something I feel like a lot of people don't think about when they first think about AI. So that's really cool. And our next speaker is Nikko van Stolk. And Nikko, feel free to go ahead and set up your share screen while I'm introducing you. So Nikko is the lead industrial designer at Kaleidoscope Innovation. Like we said earlier, he works to create collaborative spaces for robots and humans to thrive together. With a background in industrial design and a passion for machine-human interaction, Nikko creates empathetic solutions driven by user needs that embrace cutting-edge technology. He really enjoys walking a mile in someone else's shoes through the user-centered design process and applying his creativity in a way that improves quality of life. So Nikko, go ahead and take it away.
Hi there. Thank you, everyone. It's great to be invited to speak here about the work that I have been doing for the past few years on human-robot interactions. As was mentioned in my introduction, I'm a lead industrial designer at Kaleidoscope Innovation. And for the last about 3 years, I have been deeply enmeshed in working for a shipping and logistics company developing autonomous robots that move throughout their facilities. And of course, this raises a lot of issues and questions about how humans and robots will interact in a shared space. You can see here, just in the spirit of this presentation, I used a little AI myself to create a little title slide here.
Hey, Nikko, do you want to make sure your screen is shared?
Oh, I'm sorry. Apologize.
Thank you.
It was all rehearsed, and then I still blew it. All right. How's that? Can everyone see that? No. There. Okay. Apologies. All right. Now I'm sharing my screen, hopefully.
Looks good.
All right, great.
Yeah, we see it.
Great. So yes, as I mentioned, I used a little AI myself. This one was actually an AI app called Wonder to generate my own image. And as I was talking about, I've been focusing on the interactions between humans and robots in an industrial warehouse setting. And I kind of thought that actually this AI was a great example of kind of the human inputs and expectations of what you want to get, and then versus kind of what a machine can spit out. It's imperfect, but it mostly does the job, and it gets you results quickly. So that is a nice kind of segue or an analog to again my introduction here. But that is a nice segue and introduction into like why we use or why we would need to use robots in a collaborative experience. They are imperfect collaborators, but they do offer incredible advantages in terms of efficiency, safety, and productivity. And again, speaking from my experience working for a shipping and logistics company for the past 3 years, I approached this process somewhat in a naive way, but from applying classic industrial design, user-centered approach to it. Starting off with trying to understand what are the right questions to ask, first of all, about why we are applying robots to a certain setting or application. I still value the ability for humans to improvise and adapt far more than I trust the ability for a robot to. And especially in fluid situations, such as industrial warehouses, there are simple tasks to be accomplished, but there are also many unanticipated events that might occur, shortages, rushes, critical pull times, maybe somebody's out sick and needs to be backfilled. so on and so forth. And the more time I spent in these warehouses, the more I really understood the sense of community and culture that develops in a warehouse community. Actually, I'm calling in from a research trip myself, having spent all day in a warehouse doing even more research. And so again, first of all, why are we using robots? I know that there's this kind of impulse to think that robots and technology are the new hot thing, and many I've seen the impulse to jump into robotics and new technology because it's a new flashy thing. But it is important to really question and understand why specifically robots are needed in a space that's shared by humans. And then from there, as we consider the application of humans in a shared collaborative space with humans, we have to also really understand that a robot is not adaptable like a human, but it has to be somewhat specific to the task you design it for. But then again, how do you also design it to be modular and adaptable for future applications that are not anticipated or have a future planned growth? And then moving on to there, you have to consider if they're sharing space with these humans, especially those who are not necessarily the ones who made the decision to incorporate them in the first place, who they will be to these coworkers. What kind of baggage do humans carry into a collaborative environment with robots? We have, both in my own experience, and I'm sure in many of yours, both positive and negative affiliations with the idea of an intelligent robot coworker. So it's also very important to think about how people will be received and how we want to design them to be received by humans. For example, do we want them to be a mindless tool, like an enhancement or an extension of the human that's operating them? Are they really truly a coworker of the humans within a facility? Or are they a pet? Or are they simply just a threat to their job, to the humans' jobs? So it's really important and critical before you jump into just applying a robot into a shared space, a space that was otherwise dedicated to humans. You have to understand the existing social contracts you have in these places of business and community in these warehouses. And then what type of new element do you want to introduce to that culture? Is it really wise to call this robot a coworker, or is it better as a mascot or a pet or something else? But setting that bar will also kind of set you up for success or failure in terms of acceptance by those who will be sharing the space with it. And then finally, once we ask all these other questions, the final question is, okay, how do we build trust with these users once we've introduced these robots into these shared spaces with them? How do we even measure success? What is trust between a human and a robot? For example, and when I talked about character just earlier, shaping that character is really important because it might give you more leeway to work out the bugs and have people be more patient with your robot. For example, you're far more likely to forgive, a puppy for soiling the rug than your coworker. So these are really important considerations to make in the process of applying robots and human-robot interactions to a workplace. I know that many of you as technologists are probably familiar with the uncanny valley. And I just want to highlight here that the uncanny valley, exists with simple tools all the way up to humanoid robots. And as I was mentioning earlier, that level of forgiveness that you might have for a pet or a character might not be as applicable to a humanoid robot. And again, is a humanoid robot even the best application for your design? In an industrial shipping facility, do you really need a robot to look like a human, or does it need to be more like a Roomba, or does it need to be something in between because you need to engender a level of trust because it's sharing space with people? These are all questions that I have asked myself and then in turn have used to guide the design and development process of generating kind of human requirements for these human robotic interactions within these industrial warehouses. And again, as I mentioned, how do you even measure trust? What are the milestones of trust to those who are trying to implement these robots in these facilities? And together with the client and some kind of deep thinking and back and forth studying, we developed this kind of hierarchy of needs, somewhat built off of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But we basically broke it down into these 4 tiers, starting with a foundation of institutional trust. I think hopefully at least, it's safe to say that those of us who work for employers have a baseline level of trust that my employer would never field anything that would harm me, especially in an industrial environment. But then we want to quickly work our way up that pyramid towards earned trust. Really building upon that foundational institutional trust, but then demonstrating through actions and interactions that the robot sees you and you can see it and know what it's doing. And so you can feel at ease and less wary and threatened by something that could, potentially trip you or harm you or get in your way. And then, we want to work our way up to value as well. Of course, the decision makers at a higher level are starting at this value place, but this is why it's so important to look at this kind of hierarchical approach, and it builds on itself. When you're not on the floor sharing the space, it's easy to skip those first 2 steps and talk about value, but true value is really earned when those who share that space, work with those robots, truly enjoy and see the value that the robots are bringing to those individuals performing that task. And then finally, adoption. Going beyond value, really, we want to get to a point where those sharing, especially in an industrial facility and logistics where, demand goes up, and the human workforce often struggles to keep up without causing injury or burnout. Excuse me. So we want to get to a place where, this is going to be the work environment of the future, and we want people to really, truly enjoy going to work, even if it is, a large, noisy facility. Robots should be empowering. They should be building confidence, and they should be able to improve the quality of even the most rigorous, physically demanding, laborious jobs. And then finally, another major challenge of the work that I have done for this company is, how do we run in parallel? How do we apply a kind of fast and dirty iterative process that industrial designers really thrive in when there's so much complexity to even get to a prototype level to really actually test the way we would normally do with target users? If you're designing and building a robot from scratch, it's going to take you, years to develop the hardware and then the software. And in many aspects, you have to, as a designer, if you want to actually shape and control a positive human robot experience, you have to figure out a way to run ahead, to test and iterate in a way that's safe, and also that's a way that in a way is not coupled. It's a parallel design process rather than a sequential design process when you're talking about hardware and software development. So my solution to this aspect of that approach was to look at leveraging VR technology. For example, building and even testing a rudimentary RC version of an autonomous robot that I was working on in this facility would raise a whole bunch of red flags from a safety standpoint. You cannot field an industrial worker in such close proximity to an unvalidated, untested prototype. So how do we do this in a safe manner and in a rapid, agile manner? And that's where VR came in handy. And I actually went out to these fulfillment centers or facilities and actually tested with users, pulled them off of the floor and off their stations and actually asked them for their feedback. I put them in a virtual environment that simulated what they were just doing in their jobs, and then added a robotic encounter. And that way I was able to take, the latest CAD data from the hardware team, and then also improvise and iterate on how this robot should behave. And you also challenge humans in close robotic interactions to really understand what are their limits, what are their boundaries of comfort. Especially in crowded warehouse facilities, people are, shoulder to shoulder with, heavy carts and pallet jacks and packages. If you throw a robot in the mix, it's really important to understand what those same close proximity encounters will be like from a trust level with these robots. And so again, being able to be agile and leverage technology, specifically VR in this case, was the best path, and frankly, the only path that kind of presented itself given the circumstances and parameters of the design challenge. So all in all, this is a bold new world, and I fully embrace the use of VR and eventually AI in kind of developing and curating, again, as some of these other speakers said, the right type of technology and in interactions. And this VR and AI enable us to do that in a more rapid way to kind of run ahead and still be leaders in these spaces, even when complexity gets higher and higher. All right, thanks everyone. That's kind of my presentation. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Nico. That was awesome. I think as designers, we know that having users adopt any new technology is really difficult, and robots are at a whole nother level. So it was really interesting to see your experiences in working with that and how that can really be the future. So next up, our final speaker, we have Young Chen. Young, like we said earlier, is working on Axon's XR team. He comes from a marketing, research, and design background. His current work focuses on CX and US research around virtual reality training for law enforcement. He's designed several methodologies to study the UX of VR. He has spent the last 5 years focused on XR technologies within the area of design research. He recently completed his MFA at Ohio State, and his thesis was focusing on virtual reality and co-design. One of his approaches to co-design is involving the stakeholders and putting them into immersive creative spaces to explore their ideas. So, Young, I'm excited to see what you've got for us.
Perfect. Can you guys see my screen? Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. I know I'm the last speaker. It is a late time for everyone. So just relax. If everyone's grabbing food or whatever, it's dinner time. Just enjoy and dig in. So for me, I'm taking a little bit of a slightly different direction, maybe from everyone else. I'll be talking more about XR and design. It's more on I would say it's more zoomed out, more on the general side. So when I was presented, I was invited. So thank you for inviting me. I was really excited to be, invited to be speaking to a group of designers. And I was thinking to myself, I really like the idea, the blurred, right? The idea and the notion of being of something being blurred. And in the area of XR and design in particular, I've noticed that when we were talking about design, there are specific disciplines and specific processes and how we do design. But when XR and design come together and there's this new interesting relationship, what are the trends here, right? How do designers actually see themselves in this space? And how does this space actually see design contributing and being part of the space itself? So there's a lot of things that are emerging and new, but is it new or is it not? So you see that it's like, is it new or it's not? I've been working at Exxon. So if everyone's not familiar with the company, it's AXON. I don't work for the petrol company called Exxon. You know, people always get confused. And Exxon is it's a tech company in law enforcement. And basically, we were once known as tasers, so law enforcement police tasers. And little fun fact: taser is actually an acronym. It doesn't, you know, it actually stands for something. It stands for Thomas A. Swift Electric Rifle. I forgot the A stands for what. I think Anderson. Yeah, but that's the person who owns the right to the taser. And basically, Exxon does law enforcement technology, and our goal is to actually obsolete the bullet. So, you know, save lives and, you know, have less and less unintentional killings. So with that, I also want to have a shameless plug here on, like, we are going to hire a intern, a UX research intern for the XR team in the summer. So keep a lookout for that. And whoever is doing your master's or PhD right now, we would love for you to be part of the team. All right, so let's talk about this this space here. Oops, let's see. All right, so a little bit about this terminology first. XR, right? XR, extended reality or X reality. For those of you who are not familiar, but I'm pretty sure everyone here, being very interested in technology, is very well familiar with this. XR is actually an umbrella term that houses virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, AR, and mixed reality, MR. You can think about VR as taking yourself out of the virtual world, out of the real world and going into the virtual world. So that's VR. And then augmented reality is that you're now in your real world, but then there's layers of, you know, information and whatnot being augmented and added onto your real world. And mixed reality is when the two kind of comes together. And a good way to actually think about this is when you take your real world and it goes, you know, you're seeing it, the representation of your real world in a virtual space, right? So that's how you kind of differentiate between the three. And so let's talk about the relationship that XR has with design at this point. And from there, we can actually look at, you know, we see three separate categories or trends. And I've you know, even within this conference right now, this you know, today's talks, I've heard a lot of design is more gravitating towards much of the first and the second groups here, but I'll talk more about it. So the first group is design for XR, and that's when design enables XR, and it's very hardware centric, right? And then the second one, we're looking at design with XR, and that's taking XR as tools, and I've heard it being used a couple of times today, and integrated into current design work. And then what's more interesting, and this is where lines really get blurry, is the design of XR. So what are designers in this space actually create, you know, what are they creating, and what does it mean to create such experiences or such immersive experiences? And actually, if you look at it as a process or a pipeline, at every of these touch points for XR, a designer is involved. And I would actually advocate or argue that we need actually more designers to be involved, because this is a space that's very much dominated by very tangential kind of fields, you know, from game design to engineering, developers, and we need more and more design people who are trained in design, or the way to think as designers, to be in this field right now. So let's first look at the design for XR and what that actually is. And looking at these images here, I think everyone's very familiar, especially if you come from an industrial design background. These are prototypes, basically. And the design for XR is basically you're creating the hardware that goes with the experiences. And here, what we actually see is that these are very, you know, when we creating such XR devices, it is very feature heavy. And I say heavy because you can even look at the headset itself, they look heavy, right? And why is it feature heavy is because there's a lot of focus on, you want a certain technology to go in, you want certain sensors to go in, you want the latest and the greatest. And you can even see one of the prototypes there on the top right that they added a fan there because all this technology is being crammed at the front of a headset and being put in your face. That's a lot. So here's where design is actually very important. Where we're looking at the ergonomics of things, right? Where when we're putting this thing that's super heavy on the front of your head, what does that actually mean for the experience itself? And a lot of times when you're in teams where they're creating experiences, people actually forget totally about how does the headset actually feel, right? And if VR, the whole idea of this XR and technology where you put something in a face becomes something of the future, and the experiences are designed for people to put it on their face, on their heads daily. You want to consider those comfort levels, and we need designers there to be, to design and create better and more comfortable kind of headsets. And again, similar with the controllers and in interaction, you can see when VR first started, a lot of the controllers there on the top right, first they started with large bulky controllers, and that was to represent, you holding on to something. And as the industry kind of matured a little bit more, the controllers started shifting towards something that represented your hands, right? So you have, a clicking of the thumb versus a gripping, so you have the side grip buttons right now, and then there's a button that represents the way your thumb moves up and down. It's a thumbstick, and that's how the industry is shifting. And even so, within just this way of interaction, there's so many new things that are emerging right now. So you can see this little video here. You guys see that video? So this one's a video by HTC, and you can see just prototyping itself, how many different types of VR headsets are there. And you can see that a lot of the technology is being centered on the front of that headset right there. So what designers have been doing is that they're trying to shift, and literally there is a trend shift where the weight is being shifted from the front of the headset towards the back, where they're trying to create more more parts of the headset, if you can house it at the back of the headset itself. And this really changes the way the user experience or the way the user interacts with whatever experience you create. Because you can just see the top right there, you see that how bulky the headset is. And think about, what does this actually mean? When people talk a lot about such immersive experiences can help the elderly, what happens when you actually put such a headset on someone who is elderly, and their neck hurts and things like that? So you can see the shift here, how the headsets are getting more and more streamlined and easier to put on. And this is the more recent headset that we see today, and that's by Meta. And you can actually see me there playing in the office with some of the new toys we got. And what does this actually mean, right? Where the headset now becomes more and more comfortable, does it start being part of work? And with that, we go to the second part, which is designing with the XR technology itself. And I'm pretty sure everyone here is very familiar with it. And maybe in your current design work, you've actually been using some of these tools that have been presented by XR to help in your design process. So that's what it is, right? Using tools offered by XR to elevate the current design work. And many of you here are very familiar with Gravity Sketch on the left there, and especially in disciplines such as interior design and architecture, where scale is super important, right? Being able to go into such environments and looking and understanding things in scale. Even Nico, our previous speaker, just mentioned that sometimes that's the only way where you can prototype in such a space, given the time, given the resources. So this is a very, very common thing right now, where a lot of designers are actually using XR as tools. And if you want to be fancy, you can start using the technology as and testing prototypes in simulated environments. And one example is a friend of mine who works for a space company. It's not NASA, it's one of the private space companies. I think it's Blue Origin. And so as industrial designers, think about, what does a product look like or feel like, or how do you interact with a product in zero gravity? Right. So when you design it, you may have thought about, hey, the handle goes here, the way I touch it is here, but what happens now when it's in 0G? So he was just telling me a very fun, a very interesting story when they put it in the 0G. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, you're right. We actually have to make sure we can touch it on this side to kind of turn it here and turn it there. So those are some interesting things to get you thinking about how this technology is changing the way we do our work, right? And again, here, looking at ArchViz, which is a very emerging and popular thing within the VR world, where you can see that, let's just skip here for time's sake. We're just changing, you can, with high levels of fidelity, visual fidelity specifically, you can be in environments and going through very quick iterations, right? Prototypes, where you can actually invite, participants and people, and they can make decisions and really explore what are those options in a quick fashion. And then let's look at some of the more visual stuff that's happening in the field right now. And this is Vario. It's one of the more expensive headsets out there. It's actually considered a mixed reality headset. And what's interesting here is that for those who are more interested or more inclined towards the more visual design kind of disciplines, visual designers or interaction designers can create such interactions. And this is actually a real concept car where they were looking at the different types of ways you interacted with the technology within the car itself, within the car environment. And what is interesting about this particular headset is that it has ability to, it's a mixed reality headset. So you can actually see your actual hands there, and you can see that that photo there right at the bottom left, where someone's actually using a real steering wheel to see their actual hands in an immersive experience. And this is like a game changer in the industry, basically, because now you can have a different level of immersion to actually evaluate and look at some of the experiences there. So the final one, and I'll end with this, is I want everyone to start thinking about what's beyond there, right? So now a lot of designers are using it for using XR to design, but what happens when we are the ones doing the design of XR, right? How are these disciplines now being blurred? And what this is just some of the questions you can think about, right? What is the design of XR, right? What are some of the particular types of designers that are best suited for it? And you would actually find out that in the industry, a lot of good designers that are doing such design actually come from background from architecture, interior design, industrial design, right? Where it's not so much, maybe your assumption would be in such an experience, maybe the best person would be a visual designer, right? A person who's very familiar with 2D kind of principles and bringing it into VR, but that's actually not the case. And those designers actually have more of a challenge, right? Where they try to shift from the paradigm of 2D into 3D. So is this something new, or is this something that has already existed, right? What the way we have approached design, and how do we bring those principles that we understand from the way we're doing other sorts of design into the world of the XR? So what are the norms? What are the standards and the principles that to design such realities and spaces? And then here we see some of the huge considerations, right? Things like guiding, wayfinding. You need to understand space, you need to understand immersion, the depth, you need to understand resolution, comfort, interaction, audio. And one of the, like I mentioned before, one of the very interesting things is just that discussion alone between a 2D slate versus embedded UI. That's a huge discussion in the industry, right? When you're in an experience, do you have more 2D kind of UI and then you just swipe left, swipe right, or is it an embedded UI where you go towards something and interact with that particular space or that particular object or that particular screen? And a very good way that we always talk about it is actually just think about the real world, right? We're thinking about products, and designers tend to always start to think about, like let's think about like crazy ways and crazy UI, but think about the real world, right? At the end of the day, how would someone interact with something in the real world? And translate those kind of understanding and those kind of principles into the experiences, immersive experiences you create. And so with that, I just want to end with this note here. The last thing to always think about is why are we going to do, are we designing of XR? Why? The question is why. And a good model that I like to follow is DICE. So is it something dangerous? Is it something impossible? Is it something counterproductive? And that's basically if you were to do something in real life, it would be it'll be counterproductive. So a good example is if in VR you are training with someone who's rude to you, right? You cannot necessarily train for something like that in real life. So maybe that's something you can do in such an immersive space. Or is it something expensive or rare, right? So these are it's a good model to ask yourself whether this thing needs to go into such an immersive space, because nowadays with the trend growing with Meta and everything, every company is just excited. Let's try something in XR, right? But you must always ask yourself why you even want to do that in the first place. With that, thank you, and yeah, let's jump into some interesting Q&A discussions.
Thank you so much, Young. This topic of like designing for XR and like the designing of XR, I think is like so cool and unique. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm going to pass the mic on to Aaron. But before I do, one more huge thank you to all of our speakers tonight. And I'm excited for this Q&A session. Take it away, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Maria. And thank you to all of our wonderful speakers. Yeah, I see some clapping hands in there, and love to try to do what we can to show our appreciation and applause through reactions and gratitude in the chat. So thankful to have everyone here. Tonight we had a wide range of perspectives across different technologies, but all these people here are kind of the first adopter types who've had exposure to all these technologies. So I think, you know, nothing's limited to, if you talk about VR tonight or not, you know, chime in on a VR question, an AI question, whatever we got. So yeah, so I think my first question is, you know, how do we keep up with all of this? And what drives you towards picking up one of these new technologies and becoming a first adopter? And Will, I'll throw it at you first, because you seem to pick up, you all pick up a bunch of stuff. I'm just gonna throw it at Will because you spoke first, actually.
Fine. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, how to keep up with the things. I think I really find the folks that I work with very inspirational. Like I mentioned, Matt Lewis as another faculty member at Ohio State at the university. There's a wealth of people working on lots and lots and lots of interesting things. And sometimes having lunch with someone will turn you on to the next interesting application for stable diffusion or whatever. I also really benefit from teaching classes, and I've got every semester, you know, a couple dozen students that are bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. They bring in interesting references from places that I don't look, like TikTok, and also have great questions about things that I thought I understood. So it's people. I think it's people interacting with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. I found that for myself, and I mean, I'm sure Kedar and Nikko and Young, you probably all had people as well. Anything else that drives you all, or any people you all want to plug? Matt Lewis is awesome.
FOMO, probably. Just not being the first. A lot of FOMO. Seeing people like Nick Baker, John Mariello, Jamal, who's here actually, and pretty much anyone else on Instagram or Twitter and YouTube.
If I could answer this question in a more general term, I think it's twofold. I think it starts with being curious and trying to just absorb these things. I mean, ultimately, they're all tools. And I think what we're all attracted to design by is a base level curiosity. And so we kind of acquire these things and acquire these interests and acquire these awarenesses, and they kind of sit there dormant in our heads until we get the right prompts, kind of like AI. And sometimes it takes an outside voice and an outside opinion to just make those connections for us, or to prompt us to make the connections that otherwise we hadn't come to already. In the case of my work that I was referencing with human robotic interactions, I was stumped. I frankly, you know, had never designed in that space before, and I was given a short amount of time to come up with a solution to this. And so I reached out to my peers, and I didn't just reach out to my design team. I reached out to my design research team. I reached out to my mechanical engineer team. And really, I mean, as much as I love creative thinkers in industrial designers, sometimes you just have to step out of that box and talk to people who think differently. And those people often make the best connections, is what I found.
Yeah. Was the question more about, people, or more how do you become a first adopter? Because I may have gotten that wrong.
Well, I mean, there's a lot to keep up with, and Will started us off with people help us keep up with everything that's going on, and that's where, yeah.
I think for me is the industrial trends, and basically what interested me, maybe I speak for myself, what interested me in particular in the technology is how useful this is and how it can actually change. As designers, you always want to make an impact, right? And that's why I gravitated towards this particular job where, we're creating law enforcement training, we're creating training that makes law enforcement better. And I think to answer that question, it's maybe just getting, going out of your comfort zone, right? Going out of your comfort zone and exploring things. Like for myself, when I never knew XR would be something I would fall in love with. I was always interested in it ever since Google Glasses, right? But when once I started getting my, my feet wet, for example, right, I really realized I really learned to appreciate that there's a lot of value here. And as designers, like, that's why my whole talk that was gravitated towards that was designers can input so much into this area just based on the current knowledge and the way the processes and everything we know about the design process, that we should just get out of comfort zone and do it. Go ahead and explore it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's one of the trials of design is pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and finding something new, and that's where the great stuff comes from. So yeah, we have a question from the audience here. Rick Eberts, I hope I got that pronunciation right, asks, are any of the AI engines mentioned capable or focused on evaluating visual solutions in terms of legibility, impact, or hierarchy of imagery or communication? So that's in the chat if you all want to look at that a little bit more. But I think really what we're looking at here is, are these things kind of being able to pull out legibility in terms of what can I see a shoe there? Are they, looking at the impact of that technology upon the market, or these kind of hierarchies, and anyone can jump in there.
So I think that in terms of like impact on the market, I don't think anything is focused on that so far. I mean, I could be totally wrong, and because I don't know every AI engine that exists, but sorry, I think DALL-E does have a step where it does compare what it gets as an output to pictures that were in the used in the training set or something in the latent space. I don't know exactly how it works, but I think that DALL-E does compare the final result in some sort of discriminator kind of system where it checks whether it's accurate or not.
I have a thing to add, and I'm like really trying to find a link for you. So I can dig it up in a second and put it in the chat. But I read a paper a week or two ago written by computer scientists who were looking into this question. How can we find a way to assess the fit between what is generated, what is output from the system, and its training data? And specifically, they were looking at, believe it or not, they were looking into identity. And their conclusion in this, and they found some crazy metrics. I'm sorry, crazy. they were out of my league to understand some of the stuff that they were talking about. So that's maybe not the best word for it, but they found metrics to assess the fit, and they had some conclusions that to me were very Black Mirror-esque. In a way, I could have been misinterpreting their conclusion a little bit, but they were talking about how fit is something that can be not only assessed, but also like baked into the training data for an AI model in such a way that we no longer need to talk to users or people. Instead, as long as you got your model right, that's good enough. And to me, it was like flashing lights. Oh no, like that can't be it. That can't be the conclusion. And I'm seeing, Kedar, you nodding. I don't know if you saw this paper also. I'm going to try to dig it up. But for anyone who wants to get into the weeds a little bit, along the lines of Rick's question about evaluation and fit, this is a read for you.
So Jamal has just written in the chat, generally generative adversarial networks do this. So GANs are what was the top-notch text to image tech before diffusion models were a thing or became common. And yeah, he's just posted a link, so just take a look. Jamal is a really great inspiration to me. He's a computational designer and it's helped me learn quite a bit. So just take a look.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's super important for us to figure these things kind of out and to be understanding them. Along those lines, I think of how do you balance the wanting to know essentially what things do and trying things out and getting down into the technical details like Kedar was just talking about of how things work and what level do we need to know how these things work. I mean, I've been using Photoshop for years, but I don't necessarily know what goes into the technicalities behind even Bezier curves too much yet computationally. What's important with the AI space by comparison? Is it the same thing?
I'd say maybe knowing what a little bit about the training set of the model, maybe. Because
could you just elaborate a little bit, Kedar, for people who aren't as familiar with machine learning about training and testing sets and these kind of things?
So what the machine learning model is essentially shown, at least for images, it's shown a lot of images, and those images influence matrices which represent pixels, and those matrices store the color and brightness data of those pixels as weights. And those weights, each matrix of weights is related to a different set of wordnesses, or like, I don't know, colorfulness or cupness or something like that. So that's what a training set is. Like, what are the images that is used to give you that output eventually?
I also have a really good read for anyone who's interested in just what's machine learning, what is a training set, and to catch up from I know nothing to the basics of like matrices and color data and how we translate the things on the input to things on the output. I will share another link.
Awesome. Thanks both of you. Professor Nickley with the links tonight. But yeah, I mean, I think, Will, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, what are there differences between, picking up CAD or Photoshop, like we've all done, from transitioning to paper to these kind of things of working with these new tools in terms of what we need to know of how they technically work. Like you're just saying, how far have you dove in on understanding how Midjourney works beyond technically, or I really appreciate how you're experimenting it from a kind of a designerly way of discovering how it works, from seeing what the output is and inferring based on the input. How's that process been?
Thanks for the question. And it kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier on keeping up with all of the things. I will say there is probably always value in doing the deep dive and understanding the tool and the technology behind the tool. That said, that takes time and expertise. And as you kind of picked up from the stuff that I presented today, that's not the only way to learn a tool. Playing with the tool is a good way to more intuitively get a feel for what its capabilities are within your own workflow, within your own process. And I think designers, if that's even a type of person, tend to have this curiosity, this naive approach to things that allow them to not be worried about how the thing works in order to play with it a little bit. So when it comes to teaching tools that maybe 20 years ago were new, like pixel pusher tools like Photoshop, there were a lot of folks who learned how to make the things that they wanted to make, like posters and graphics and typography, without having to understand the machine language underneath, or any of the second level coding or any of that kind of stuff. And I would say it doesn't mean that they were any less capable of being critical about the tools or improving the tools, right? One of the things that we as designers focus on is people and how people use the things that we're designing, the tools that are around. And I think because people are still a part of these systems that we're talking about, AI, human systems, human and robot systems, as Nikko was talking about, if we stay focused on the human and find a way to interact with these systems as humans, as people, and we're aware of how they make us feel, of our actions, of our mental states, then I think it gives us a good way to feel comfortable diving into learning something as new and unfamiliar as, Midjourney to a lot of folks, or machine learning, or who knows what spice. That was kind of a rambling, almost answer to your question.
That was a great answer. And I think, I see Nico smiling, I'm sure. Do you have anything to add to that, Nico?
I really resonated with the human experience part of it. I think when it comes back down to it, and what I've been talking about in my little add-on to this is that, all of these are ultimately just tools, and they streamline things in certain ways that help us get to the core of what we want to communicate to each other, and share about an experience. Like AI, sure, some might buck at it. When I was first playing with it, my girlfriend asked, like, oh, is this even art? Like, what's the point of this? You can make like 50 of these in a minute. Like, what's the point of this skill? And it does take away, the implied technical visual mastery in some ways. But is that really the point of art? Is that, I think it's more has to do with capturing something that you wanted to communicate that was stuck in your head. And so whether it's words or technical prowess, really all you're doing is increasing accessibility to communicating what your intent is. When people were talking about applying robots into shared industrial spaces, the conceit is always like, from the management system level side is this will be great. We can automate these things. People will love it because it'll make their jobs easier. But on the human side, you have to raise these questions of like, okay, I see you've quantified, return on investment and improvement in efficiency, but have you quantified the value of community within these spaces? Have you put a value on even just basically something as like, I mean, they've kind of touched on it in employee retention, but what that gets to a deeper level of is, do I feel rewarded? Do I feel satisfied in these spaces? And like, technology might seem at first like these silver bullets, but in reality, it's just more kind of a tool to reveal kind of other aspects of our wants and needs. And when they're talking about robotics, I had to bring up to the client like, hey, what are the social contracts you've had in this place that you might be violating? For example, you have walkways that have little pedestrian logos on them. They're just humans. They're not robots. So have you considered that you're violating a social contract that you've made with your workers? You know, have you considered that people find community and a culture within these places? How can we, you know, improve their lives with this technology, but in a way that is very intentional and constructive rather than just displacing? That was, again, a long rambling segue, but technology and human experience.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights some of the things, like the new skills that I think are being demanded out of designers. Softer skills, some people call them, such as empathy, and things that we commonly associate with design research, but really are becoming a holistic requirement for us as designers. And so I guess, like, building off of that, both technical and I don't like the word soft because it in some ways diminishes the importance of these skills. They are just as hard as the hard skills. But what are the important skills to start adding to the toolbox and really making sure that we're bringing in as we approach new technologies? And Young, I'll target you because you're working in a really sensitive area that's doing some really important stuff and really trying to tackle a huge problem. And how do you wrap your head around that? How did you wrap your head around that when you started at that company?
Well, this is a very difficult question to answer. I think, you know, first, the idea, you know, it's a very just being in the company and facing the problem, it's a very delicate problem, right? Because it's not black and white, right? If we understand the whole, you know, everything that's going on, and especially in the last few years, but what I saw was the same problem I saw even before I joined the company, and is that technology in anything we do, right? And I had a chat with people from Snapchat, for example, right, where they were saying, what about the trends right now that is you know, that's growing within the social media kind of world, right, where you have TikTok, where people just scroll through videos over and over and over again, right? How does that impact you know, people's lives and everything? And for me, that goes back to the understanding that technology can always do something, you know, can go do something evil, but at the same time, we as designers, we have the power, right, to take that technology and push it towards positive, you know, no matter what it is. And that's how I wrap my head around just like the current situation I'm in, my current company that I'm in. And every day, you know, it can be rather stressful, but it is very rewarding knowing that what I'm doing is actually inching closer and closer towards, you know, making the world a better place, right? Especially here in the US, right, and law enforcement for that. I hope that answers the question. I know it's a little late, so you know it has reached that stage where our cognitive load has reached the max.
There's a lot to think about during the day.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to talk about those skills that we got to pick up, technical or personal? I'll try to do that instead of soft. I like that better than soft. I saw oh, cool. Okay. Macy, I think is the pronunciation there. Sorry if I got that off. But I want to bring back up what Scott brought in the chat of loving the idea of thinking about the social contracts that we might be trespassing on. I think that's huge as we're designing within the context of other cultures and within the context of or bringing these technologies in, assuming that we're able to substitute reality for a virtual world. And we've seen that in a lot of cases that that's not necessarily the case, and there are consequences that come along. Or like Will illustrated, words don't mean the same thing when they're being used to generate images as they do when you might say them or feel them personally. But yeah, Macy asks, what are some common stumbling blocks, these new tech acceptance, with new tech acceptance in the product development workflow? So I think, Kedar, I'm going to throw that at you first. What are common stumbling blocks? Well, and also, Nikko, you talked a lot about trust too. Both of those things in terms of the development of technologies and the use of technologies, some stumbling blocks that people run into.
Sorry if I'm a bit slow. It's actually like 3 a.m. here, but I think that
So happy to have you.
I think that a lot of the stumbling blocks are just right now with AI, it's linking stuff together. It's like linking the images to the 3D AI, to Blender, and then to manufacturing. But with stuff with, I guess, newer AI, it's also not having enough training data. So that's why we don't see voxel-based AI around, because there isn't enough 3D models to train that voxel-based AI. Sorry, did I answer that right? Is that the correct question?
Yeah. Like there's no wrong answers here. We're talking about what we want to talk about. But yeah, I think that like those are kind of some of the things. What are some things I was thinking as you were showing the manufacturing stuff? Where do you think people start to extrapolate too far on what is actually the really hard part of manufacturing? We can generate 100 images. I saw you generate a sole. I saw you transfer some mesh stuff. What's the hardest part within there, the part that's not figured out yet?
I guess making something which is sustainable, which is, well, if you've already chosen a manufacturing process, then you can curate your AI images to that manufacturing process. But say you want to make something which is going to have a new construction. I don't know if y'all have seen the Nike ISPA link. I don't know if that's pronounced right, but it's a shoe that you can take apart into separate parts. Like it has a knitted part and it has a midsole which is separate. So making dismantleable constructions is really important, and that's not something that AI knows how to do because there just isn't enough, again, training data on that.
Gotcha.
I'd love to chime in too. I'm sorry, Kedar. Yeah, if you're as long as you're done, Kedar.
Go on.
So I think there are several stumbling blocks when it comes to eagerness to adopt new technologies. I mentioned a couple, like trespassing across social contracts when you're talking about automation, even about trying to gain feedback from users that would work with these robots. Being very careful about how you talk about automation because there's a sensitivity to automation replacing jobs. That's a stumbling block. There's the violating social contracts within the culture of a facility. Introducing robots that are in some ways not supposed to be in areas are suddenly there in areas with people. And then I'll also challenge myself. Using VR is not an end-all be-all tool. And in fact, maybe even in my own process working for this client, it has gone as far as it can. And to that extent, I just got back from a facility where I was doing user testing. No VR was involved, just plywood, screws, some video cameras, and a questionnaire. And so again, it's about understanding these tools and being excited about them, but not being so excited about them that you're married to them when they're not appropriate. You know, and eventually we will get to a point where we're testing with prototypes. I think as designers and technologists, I'm not really afraid of being made obsolete by technology, because ultimately our special power is knowing when to use the technology and how, with a focus on, again, the human experience. You know, technology can be fantastic and algorithms can be amazingly analytical, but in the end, there's an essence to like the human experience and human nature that is, you can get close, but you can't get all the way. And, you know, maybe it'll ultimately end up with us designing AI algorithms to solve some of these problems. Maybe, you know, robots will become more integrated in different ways that we can't even predict, but ultimately there will always be people, you know, working in facilities, if not directly, you know, operating, you know, the manufacturing line, then it's servicing the robots that do. If it's not generating the art, it's training the AI. Because ultimately, the consumers of these products and these goods that we are generating are also fellow humans. And I think AI and technology, as also an outgrowth of human thought and imagination, will never fully replace us as designers and humans. And we're kind of those experts that have kind of ingrained and enmeshed ourselves in these technologies to truly understand both the good and harm they can do, so that hopefully we can kind of guide responsible development and application of those things.
Absolutely. That was a great way to end our Q&A section, and really appreciated the breadth that both of you brought there at the end, and everyone's brought to this whole night. On the way out, I want to give everyone the opportunity to plug some things. 3 things would be great. 1, you know, who's inspiring you right now, that's out there that we should all be checking out. 2, you know, what's some software, hardware on the horizon that you're really excited about? And 3, of course, grateful to have you here, but also this is your platform to use, you know, anything that you're working on that we should be checking out from you or your team. And yeah, whoever's ready to go on that, dive in.
I'll hop in here. Who's inspiring me? Recently, it's been voter participation in our midterms, setting historical records. That's amazing. That's inspiring, and it gives me hope. Don't care who or what you voted for, but to see the amount of turnout for a midterm is amazing. In terms of technology, you know, I have my hesitation about Meta and Facebook, but I do think the Quest 2, for what it could do with augmented reality, especially, and kind of the next generation of VR technology, what that could do as a new tool for us as designers, we're just at the cutting edge of that. And as that technology matures, it's going to allow, again, more insights that we can find from users, and more methodologies that we can practice in getting better, more user-centered practices in a mainstream focus. I forget what was the third one.
What are you up to?
What am I up to?
where can we keep track of you, and what's cool in your work right now?
Oh man, I'm still in. You know, I know everyone's moved on to Christmas already, but I'm still basking in the afterglow of a very successful group Halloween costume and an over-the-top pumpkin jack-o'-lantern flamethrower combination that I made. So,
where can we see that at? That sounds awesome.
Oh, I have actually rejected most social media over the pandemic, so I pride myself in being a ghost online.
That's fair.
Except in forums that matter. It's really great to be out here and being involved and sharing and collaborating here. Yeah.
Well, that sounds sweet. Kedar, I see you're unmuted. Do you want to jump in quick? Someone that's inspiring
sorry.
you.
Had been unmuted the whole time.
Oh, you're all good. I mean, if you're not ready to go, I won't pick on you. I just figured you were somewhat ready. Will or Jan, if you want to jump in, feel free.
I better jump in because I gotta hop off and work still continuing. It's only 5+ year. So I think as far as inspiration, the people I work with in my company really inspires me. A lot of ex-law enforcement, especially, and they are really at the this is not an easy space to be in, right? Because there's hate and misunderstanding on both sides. But I think people who stand their ground and still continue to do the good work, right? Just for the benefit of everyone, that's something admirable. As far as technology is concerned, it's funny. I don't actually use a lot of XR technology in my day-to-day kind of work, right? But I think even the cross between AI and technology, that's actually a great thing that I'm really excited about right now, because that's what we do, and it actually helps fulfill a lot of the gaps that currently is that we're experiencing with training, and especially and the last one, what I have been working on, some things we probably cannot share, but definitely some of the exciting things that I could share is that we are creating immersive experiences where this one I could share. It's very interesting. So what we're creating are what we would call community engagement videos. So instead of we're creating videos where law enforcement officers can go in and understand the community, right? So we have modules such as schizophrenia, mental, such as suicide awareness, things like that. So we put officers in such experiences where they can be in the perspective of someone who's going through such an episode. And how does that look like, right? And does that actually help people change their perspective? So that, thank you everyone, right? And I got off.
Thanks for coming, Young. We appreciate it.
Thanks.
You.
I guess I go quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, sure. Thanks. The person who's inspiring me. So a lot of the AI that we've been talking about is modeled on neural networks, which is modeled on brains, real human brains. And a lot of our neural networks are just a tiny fraction of, the capacity, the power of what's in all of our brains. Some of you know I have two little humans at home, and they're essentially a young neural network. So they have honestly been inspiring me a lot. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. The 3-year-old just the other day said, looked outside at our van, which was covered in leaves. And she said, our van's a porcupine. It's getting real porky. And to me, it was beautiful because it's definitely this match between what we see, how we use language to describe it, how she's interpreting it, how my brain interprets it. It totally fits in line with this conversation today. So look to the littles, because they have a way of seeing the world that is useful sometimes. The technology that's inspiring me, someone mentioned the new Quest. Yeah, that's up there. So I'll go with that for now. And a thing that I'm working on, I'll just paste it in the chat. I mentioned a few times this training about affirmative healthcare practice. That's the training. Right now, it's public, but you need to use the username and password. It's geared toward healthcare providers, mental and physical healthcare providers, but it's at a level that anyone might enjoy and understand. So if you feel like checking out some work that's funded by Department of Medicaid, collaboration between social workers, clinicians, meaning doctors, physical healthcare providers, a couple design researchers, a whole design team at Little C doing VR stuff. That's a good one to check out. thanks for the plug opportunity, Aaron.
Of course. And Kedar, thanks for staying up with us. We really appreciate it and are so happy to have you here.
No problem.
Yeah, what's in your world?
So, someone who inspires me, I would say Nicoline, who was on video, and Luis and Jordi from Footwearology Lab. Luis is a computational designer. He is the head of computational design at Footwearology Lab. So he teaches me pretty much everything. And Jordi, because he is just an amazing person and has knitted a lot of really interesting textiles, which I'm going to post a link actually to his. Sorry, I just have to Google it right now. Yep. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, here we are. This is Jordi's work, and this is also a link to Footwearology Lab. So Jordi is the co-founder along with Nicoline. And then a technology that I really like, or a piece of hardware which I really like. I don't know, but I'd probably say one of the new GPUs, 4090 or something. I just think that they're going to be really useful in the future. And I don't know if I can put my own Instagram, 1 second. I'm mostly active on Instagram. I don't really use LinkedIn that much, but here is my Instagram. But yeah, I haven't posted in a while. I've been super busy.
Get that, making cool things. It's awesome. But I think, well, thank you for you all being here. Really excited about what's going on. And it's so cool to hear about this space. I think Maria's got some closing words for us. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
yes, another thank you for all the speakers and for everyone who came out to listen and watch today. And thank you for all of these resources that are being shared in the chat. It's really exciting. I can't wait to look through all these later. And, you know, we're coming to the end of the 3rd year of holding this event, which is really exciting, wildly different every time, starting in the middle of COVID. And now we're here. And if you enjoyed this event, or if you have any other ideas for Blurred Lines events or want to help out with any of the chapters, please email any of our chapters or at our IDSA emails, or message us on social media, and I will share these tags again. So these are our websites, our Instagram accounts, Facebook accounts. I think we all mostly use Instagram a little bit more than Facebook. But thank you guys again so much for joining, and we'll see you around.